Yes, welcome in. Well, that's two straight wins for the Badgers. They went on the road, took care of Rutgers 42-7. When we chatted last week, Jesse, there was nothing that they could do in that game that was going to change your opinion about how they could play the rest of the year. It was not going to, nothing that was going to happen was going to make you feel different about their chances of maybe making some noise the rest of the season. Did something happen to maybe change your mind at all there at all? Maybe a little bit, not just a little bit.
I might feel a little bit different.
All right. Boom.
Yeah. I said going into the season 7-5, that at least feels more on point here. They're still going to have to play a Penn State team that's going to be unbeaten, an Oregon team that beat Ohio State. But I think at the very least, it gives you a little more optimism about what's possible in those kinds of matchups. We knew we needed to see a continuation of what they did against Purdue, against a team that, while the Scarlet Knights looked terrible on Saturday, Wisconsin made them look terrible. That was still a team that had a top 20 scoring defense and one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. And Wisconsin just looked like the Badgers teams of yesteryear, where they completely dominated and the other team had no shot. And that's about as encouraging a sign as you could ask for.
We're going to get into all of it, what went right, what went wrong, and then get to some listener questions as well. Before we do, as always, the Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have some great vintage gear up on homefieldapparel.com that you can check out. Wisconsin, they've released a ton of Wisconsin stuff just in the last couple of months. So go up there, check it out. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, so let's get into it. Last week's What Went Right went for an extended period of time. I think today's can as well. Let's start, though, Jesse. Well, no, you know what? I asked you the question. What went right?
I'm going to start. I'm guessing where you were going to start. Sometimes we're simpatico. I'd like to think we can read each other's minds after all these years. I'm going to start on offense. And specifically, I think we need to talk about Phil Longo and the job that he did, because we've spent a lot of time, and a lot of other people have spent a lot of time talking about what has not happened for this offense since he came here with this air raid offense. So whatever variation it was going to be, it was not successful, at least often enough. I thought he called a great game, maybe the best game that he's called since he's been here. And of course, it comes down to the players executing. But I felt like he did a good job of mixing it up, keeping Rutgers on its toes consistently, and showing they could get some big pass plays, but also showing they're willing to be physical. And hey, 2 plays out of the power I, and one of them goes for a 9-yard touchdown run. I didn't know what I was watching. So I just think it's worth acknowledging that if we're going to talk about what hasn't happened, this kind of felt like the blend that Luke Fickell wants with what Phil also wants, which is a good balance, but being able to hit some explosive plays. And they did a little bit of everything.
You think Phil Longo was trolling us with that two plays out of the I formation?
I don't think he was trolling us, because the name of the game is winning, but it is worth noting that they had gone under center once the entire season for a play against Alabama. So for them to do it twice, and obviously the first one was a 3rd and 3 near the goal line, which at least put him in position after Tawee Walker gained 2 yards to convert a 4th and 1 out of the shotgun, another talking point this season. So everything it felt like was working, and he dialed it up pretty well.
Yeah. So the the second time they went, it wasn't barge formation wise, but it was as close as I think you're going to see these guys get, because JP Benchwall was brought in as the extra tight end. You had 2 tight ends on the field. You had Jackson Aker as the fullback, and you had obviously a 225, 230 pound Tawee Walker as the running back, and went right off the left side and wasn't even touched. And so, yeah, that felt familiar. It's not something we've seen for a while, but it felt familiar. And I think people can get back on that bicycle and ride it pretty quickly.
I want to go out on a limb here and say, as we have now concluded the first half of the season, that's my play of the year. I know there was a 69-yard touchdown pass to Tretch Kekahuna, various other long plays, but that to me almost sort of symbolized everything Wisconsin wants to be under Luke. Of course, they were able to do a lot of other things. Joe Brunner knocked his dude back so far, and Jackson Aker, they both got right next to each other and handled their responsibility to give Tawee Walker an open lane around the left side. It was sort of like if you were an old school Badgers fan, you're salivating about what you saw, but also realizing you saw more in the passing game and things that had been lacking in recent years. So Yeah, I honestly think that's my play of the year.
I love it. I love it. The one play that no one expected is your play of the year, right?
Well, no one expected Braedyn Locke to tuck and run on another situation. Like they just
See, he's called that play like I think he's called it twice. Maybe he's called it 3 times, but I know he's called it twice for sure. The draw I'm talking about, the one against Ohio State, it hit much bigger against Ohio State than it did against Rutgers, but it still resulted in the exact same thing. That was a first down, and that was all that mattered. But let's talk about Tawee Walker. 2 weeks ago, Luke Fickell said they wanted to cut down on how many running backs they were going to use on a regular basis. And in the 2 games since, he's run for 94 yards and 198 yards, and he's scored 6 touchdowns. He has made Luke Fickell and Phil Longo, for that matter, that decision completely has paid off. And obviously, Darian Dupree's gotten some carries as well, and we'll talk about Cade Yacamelli too. I know there's a lot of questions about maybe he should be the second guy instead of Darian, but it doesn't really matter. The number one guy, clear and far away right now, is Tawee Walker, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon, and he deserves it.
Yeah, we saw this in the spring, which I know we talked about then. He was one of the maybe surprises of the spring because of how consistent it was, how physical he was, and some of the quickness that you would not expect, or the burst. Just because I know I've said this when they got him, and I remember getting that news, I was like, well, why are they doing this? At the time, they had 7 scholarship. It would have been, seven scholarship running backs, because you still had Ches Malusi. You still had Nate White at the time. You obviously had Jackson Aker and Cade Yacamelli, who weren't switching positions, and you had 3 freshman running backs coming in, 2 of which were 4-star players that you figured were going to be a part of the plans here sooner rather than later. And now we're seeing why. They obviously saw something on film that made them believe in him. He did some good things at Oklahoma. I just think his story overall is sort of remarkable. A guy who had 1 scholarship offer out of high school to Jackson State ends up going to Palomar Junior College and then spends 2 years at Oklahoma, where he's a non-scholarship player and finally earns a college scholarship at the FBS level in his senior year at Wisconsin. And he's showing what he can do. They gave him the ball 18 times in the first half alone against Rutgers. He could have carried it 30 times. He just didn't need to. Ends up with those 24 carries for 198 yards, 3 touchdowns, and breaks off a 55-yard touchdown run too. He's been everything they could have possibly hoped for. And really, when you have a running back that can do that, we see what it's like for a Wisconsin offense over the years, not comparing him to some of those other great tailbacks, but just in terms of productivity, you will take those numbers all day, and it makes things function a whole lot better.
I think I saw it was the first, he joins Jonathan Taylor and Melvin Gordon is like the first running back to have multiple touchdowns at Wisconsin, like in back-to-back games, or maybe it's multiple touchdowns in 3 straight games. I don't know what it was. Either way, it was, he's in some pretty good company with those 2 guys. And again, we're not saying he's them, but he's also getting healthier. He's still wearing that big brace on his knee, but he's getting healthier. Luke Fickell said as much afterwards. And he said, I heard him talking, Tawee Walker talking to some media, and he said, I feel fantastic right now, even though he carried the ball how many times. We'll see if he's still feeling that same way, as that adrenaline wears off and he gets back into it. But I mean, he's a guy that can handle that workload, and he has these first 2 weeks, or these last 2 weeks, and I'm sure it'll be the same way moving forward. Braedyn Locke. Well, I mean, again, I got a question. Do we owe an apology to Braedyn Locke? I don't think I don't know what you would need to apologize for. I think what had happened in his previous starts before these last 2 weeks was worthwhile of criticism and some skepticism. And the last 2 weeks, he has started to show that he is more than maybe what we gave him credit for. But I don't know that we need to issue an apology just yet.
Yeah, I mean, you are what your play says you are. And at a certain time, just like this team, it was not up to the level that people wanted to see. And these 2 games have definitely changed the discourse around this team. And you can debate how good or bad these teams are. And maybe Rutgers is not a good team in the end. We'll see. But still, they've been able to do some things through the last 2 games that they've very rarely done. The fact they've had 500 plus yards of total offense in back-to-back games for the first time since 2010. That's unbelievable. And that doesn't happen without a lot of pieces working together. But Braedyn Locke is right at the forefront of that. I just look at the first offensive series that Wisconsin had. Now, Tawee Walker converted a huge 3rd down, He went up the middle. There was nothing there. He broke outside. They were able to keep the chains moving. And then Braden broke off 3 straight really good passes. One of them was a 37-yarder. And then the last was a great catch by Will Pauling for a 16-yard touchdown. Other than that second drive where I felt he got a little too ambitious, maybe it was one of those Kobe heat checks. He just threw it deep into double coverage. And we saw Phil Longo was less than thrilled with that decision when Braden got over to the sideline. Other than that, I thought Braden was excellent. Obviously had another touchdown drive in the first quarter. He's been delivering some real sharp passes, giving his receivers an opportunity to catch the ball. And I'm sure we could talk about the offensive line, but they play a big part in this. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the offense is starting to click at a time when the O-line is able to protect and block very well.
Yeah, 1 sack in the last 2 weeks, right? I think is what the number is for those guys up front. And the throw into the coverage, it was cover 2. And he talked about it afterwards that it was just a really, really poor decision. But that said, you also want to give your guys chances. And that's what he did on the Will Pauling throw, right? And when you have a situation with Vinnie Anthony being able to spread the field, or I guess stretch the field is the more appropriate term, you kind of want to take as many shots as you possibly can. And we've seen this, we saw it with Jaden Reed last week. And it's always the Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill thing. F it. Hill's down there somewhere. F it. Reed's down there somewhere. Braedyn Locke goes, I know it wasn't great, but F it. Anthony's down there somewhere. And so, yeah, you want to give your guys chances. And that's exactly what he has done for Vinnie Anthony these last, 3 weeks. And I know maybe he didn't get a shot down the field to Vinnie Anthony against Purdue, but he put a ball right there where he was able to take off and, get up to 21 miles per hour. Not bad for a guy who doesn't have great speed, Gary Danielson. I don't know why I keep on going back to that. It was like just a throwaway comment. He's like, you don't have to have 4.3 speed to make this play, even though that's exactly what Vinnie Anthony has. But Braedyn Locke, yes, I think it's arrows certainly pointing up, and he's got more opportunities to shove it in everybody's face that maybe was doubting him prior to these past 2 weeks, because they got Northwestern this week, and then it picks up a little bit of a notch with Penn State and Iowa, and then obviously Nebraska and Oregon all still waiting for these guys.
It also shows some of the depth they have at wide receiver, which we've touched on a little bit, but Will Pauling obviously gets hurt on a play that certainly looked scary. One of those where the guy he fumbled the ball away because he was on the ground, not moving, and you don't know exactly what that means. And Wisconsin, just like the week before, when they didn't have Bryson Green and Will and Tyrell Henry, and Bryson and Tyrell were not available for this game, they're still able to have playmakers down the field. Vinnie Anthony has really come on strong here these last 3-4 weeks. He obviously had the long touchdown catch against USC and a couple 50-plus yard touchdowns. And he had 2 great catches, the one I mentioned on the first series, but then he also has a 47-yarder over the middle that gets Wisconsin down to the 2 and allows Darian Dupree to score his first career touchdown. So you've got him, you've got CJ Williams, who seems like anytime there's a third down play, you want to give him the ball and he can get a first down. That's a pretty good way to do it. We've seen what Tretch Kakahuna can do. So it just feels like these pieces are starting to come together where it makes you believe, well, I wouldn't say they've turned a corner, but it feels like they're starting to do something that makes you think progress is happening and is imminent.
I know we talked about it last week. Yeah, CJ Williams has 5 catches the last 2 weeks, and all of them are first downs. So yes, it was an important third down too. That where there was pressure coming off the right side, and I don't think they ended up scoring the drive, but pressure coming off the right side, and he went up and made a play for Braedyn Locke, and a ball that was not exactly where it needed to be, but he gave him a shot, he gave him a chance, and he made the play for him. So yeah, I think that is, as much as anything, has really stood out for me these past 2 weeks. Is yes, Braedyn Locke has delivered some great passes, but his guys have also made some great plays for him. The Tretch catch against Purdue, both of his touchdowns were great catches, right? And he made the first touchdown was a great play, he then took off and whatever. The second play was a great catch in tight coverage. Will Pauling's catch was in tight coverage. You think about 28-7 against Rutgers, and it's third down, and it looks like it might be an interception. Instead, Tretch Kakahuna pops up out of nowhere and catches the ball, and the next play, Tawee Walker goes 55 yards for the score. And if the game wasn't over at 28-7, it was definitely over at 35-7. And So as much as you give a ton of credit to Braedyn Locke for moving this offense the way it needs to be, his guys have made plays for him that maybe they hadn't made plays earlier in the season.
Yes. And Tucker Ashcraft had some action there, and he can stretch the field. So he's worth mentioning too. I mean, you talk about the 69-yarder to Tretch. I think that really encapsulates what this offense wants to be, and is also one of those maybe plays of the year offensively, just because if you look, Braden threw that pass 13 yards through the air from the line of scrimmage to where Tretch caught it. And then you have an explosive playmaker, and this is obviously against Purdue, who can outrun the defense. You have good blocking. Your offensive line gave Braedyn Locke almost 6 seconds to stand back there and not get touched. And that's everything this offense wants to be. They were able to carry it forward against Rutgers. And I think when we're talking about Braden having playmakers help him, all you have to do is look at Rutgers on the other side, where Cade Yacamelli is throwing to his guys, and they can't catch anything. At one point, they had 4 drops. Maybe it was almost 2 or 3 in a row on one series. And I was like, did they put grease on their hands? Is this a prank or something? I don't understand what's happening. Nobody could catch the ball, but that's makes all the difference in the world. When you have trust in your guys and they can go make a play, it makes everybody look better.
I think it was the world, excuse my use of the term karma here, but I think it's the world finding its level spot after some of the catches that Minnesota made back in 2021 at Wisconsin, or 2022 at Wisconsin, for Cade Yacamelli when he threw for 300 and some odd yards, when he was just tossing the ball up and their guys were just making some ridiculous catches. It all comes back. So he is not I think we were on the same page last week. He's not a good, I don't think you wanted him to beat you, and he couldn't. And that obviously, and we'll get to the defensive side of the ball, but just before we do get to that side, the offensive line, they continue to stack very good performances back to back to back. And I think, maybe the most improved player team-wise is Atticus Bertram's, but yes, the most improved unit from being, I don't want to call them a liability by any stretch, they weren't. But from late last season into this season, they have continued to take strides. And it obviously helps that you have so much experience along that line, and they've worked and they played so much football together. But you can't really give too much. You can't really give enough credit for what AJ Blazek and Casey Robach and the rest of the guys in that room have done to kind of put the offense back on, because without him, you don't have Braedyn Locke sitting back there throwing all these long passes, because he's not going to have time to throw, and you're not running for 309 yards if you don't have an offensive line that's opening up holes.
Yeah, the offensive line deserves a ton of credit. I think it's really difficult to break down offensive line play. What is one guy doing? But what you see is the totality of those efforts. And the easy things that you notice are, well, are they committing silly penalties pre-snap that's putting Wisconsin in a bad position? Are they not blocking very well, so there's no holes for the running backs? Are they not able to pass protect, so Braedyn Locke is consistently running for his life? I think we saw some signs of this, and we discussed it during the preseason and in the spring, where it felt like, even though sometimes it's tough to judge because you're also going against Wisconsin's defense, so is one good, is one bad, but it felt like there were some really big holes for those running backs, and it felt like things were starting to come together. And obviously, Luke Fickell has said from the beginning of this offseason that he just had so much confidence in his tackles, Jack Nelson and Riley Mahlman, and I think we're starting to see why Joe Brunner has been just a great addition. Like, even though he hadn't started any games, it felt like a multi-year starter coming into his role, who should have gotten more opportunities a year ago. You still have Jake Renfro. Obviously, you have Joe Huber, who can play any position. And so it just feels like they're playing exceptionally well. I think AJ Blazek deserves a lot of credit. This has not been an easy situation for a line, especially for veterans who have had a different O-line coach every year forever. But he's been able to help mesh this in a way that has gotten them to perform very well. And this isn't specifically related to the O-line, but I think it's worth mentioning. I didn't even realize this until I think maybe they mentioned it on the broadcast, and I looked it up. Wisconsin is third in the country in fewest penalty yards per game. Like, that is one of the biggest formulas to me about how Wisconsin can win games, is because it doesn't beat itself. Some of the best Wisconsin teams we've seen have been able to do that. And I think that speaks to some of the discipline that obviously is team wide, but on the offensive line as well. Because you look a year ago, and Jack Nelson, I think, led the Big Ten in penalties, at least among offensive linemen. And he's just playing so much better, and it feels like everything's much more connected.
Yeah, Iowa's number 1 and Wisconsin's number 3. That feels very
on
appropriate.
brand.
Feels very appropriate. Feels very appropriate. They're obviously much different programs now than they routinely have been, but just in terms of the penalties, don't beat yourself. That had been, I think, it was a huge problem last year, and actually a few times here this year as well. But the numbers are down significantly. You're right. All right, let's switch over to the other side of the ball, because I think we went into this game thinking Wisconsin needs to be able to dominate both sides of the line of scrimmage, right? Like you need to be able to run the ball against Rutgers because they had been gashed at times, and if you're going to, that would set up some of the stuff in the passing game. I don't know if that ended up being the case. I think they passed whenever they wanted to as well. Wisconsin did, because they're playing at a very high level when it comes to that. But defensively, it was, can they stop the Rutgers running game? And they did. When you go back and look at the stats, and obviously Kyle Monangai, he had his first 15 carries went for 39 yards. He finished with 19 for 72, but his first 15 carries went for 39 yards. I don't know how you do a better job than that on a guy who, against almost everybody else, has been very, very difficult to stop. And now 2 straight years, Wisconsin has done a great job against him.
This defense is playing outstanding football right now. We knew they needed to stop Kyle Monangai, and they did. Other than a touchdown run early in the fourth quarter, you're not going to shut out a team on the road, generally speaking. And so Rutgers got one on the defense. But other than that, this is a guy who came in ranking second in the Big Ten in yards per game, over 130 yards rushing and 5.8 yards per carry. And he ends up averaging fewer than 4 yards a carry. And for the most part, was a non-factor. I think Rutgers came into this game averaging 3.8 punts per game, and Rutgers punted on the first 5 drives of the first half. And if you look at the first half drives, they had 6 punts, a missed field goal, and a turnover on downs. So the defense really stepped up. And really, a huge moment was when Rutgers gets to Wisconsin's 10-yard line, and it looks like, okay, maybe they're going to have a chance to make a game of this. It's 4th and 1. Rutgers went shotgun, and since that's been such a fun talking point, and Wisconsin was able to bow up and get the stop. They've just been exceptional here the last couple weeks, and for as much praise as we want to give to Phil Longo for what he's been able to do, Mike Tressel deserves a lot, and it feels like he's found the right formula, because they've been aggressive and opportunistic, and we're also able to get an interception where Hunter Wohler gets his hands on a pass over the middle, and then Preston Zachman picks it off. So they've played great football.
Almost had another score because Elijah Hills almost had Monangai in the end zone. Like it was very, very close, and he continues just to jump out at random times, not even random times, but important times. He was in on that 4th down stop. I'm talking about Elijah Hills and the defensive line. He was in on that. Like I think of all the transfers on the defensive side of the ball, the one that maybe you didn't know was going to have a huge impact, but has ended up having a huge impact, has been Elijah Hills. They needed it at that spot because they lost James Thompson Jr., but you're never sure exactly what to expect with the guy coming up from a level below Division I, and for him to do what he's done, and look, they did not put the defensive line did a great job against run. There was virtually no pressure on Cade Yacamelli yesterday, which is fine. It's fine because I think stopping the run was more important, and I thought a lot of different guys played a role in that. But I continue to have Elijah Hills jumping out, and when I think about the creating chaos thing that Luke Fickell and former defensive line coach Greg Scruggs talked about last year all the time, he and Mike Tressel for that matter, he has been the one guy that has continuously done it. And I don't know that I expected that. Certainly didn't expect that coming into the season.
I think I came into this season feeling a little gun shy about what to expect from a defensive line transfer, in large part because of Darian Varner a year ago, where he's a first-team All-AAC performer, and then he comes to Wisconsin. He's not really part of the rotation, doesn't get a ton of snaps, ends up transferring out. Now, you could say his body type was different at Temple, and how was it going to hold up in the Big Ten? But you never know. And especially coming up from the FCS level, if I would have picked between Elijah Hills and Braedyn Lane, the other transfer they brought in from the FCS of Stephen F. Austin, I would have thought Braedyn Lane would have had a bigger impact. And we saw it at least a little bit in the preseason, but Elijah Hills has taken advantage of his opportunity. He's gotten a bunch more reps, and he's making plays and he's consistently showing up. And since you're talking about that play where they almost got the safety on Kyle Monungai, I do think it's worth mentioning in the what went right category. Atticus Bertram's has been unbelievable here through 6 games. Like, it's night and day from where he was last year. I remember talking to him in the preseason, and he said that basically Luke Fickell was not happy with his performance a year ago. And he said, I'm my own harshest critic and I wasn't happy, but I feel like I've put the work in and I'm going to be a lot different this year. And sometimes that feels like lip service, but he has been completely different. And I bring that up because the play that preceded the almost safety was a punt that was perfectly dropped in there and downed at the 2-yard line, where Wisconsin can almost get the safety, force 2 incompletions, and then get a 3-and-out punt. Bertram's has been able to flip the field, and obviously the defense has then been able to take advantage.
Yeah, I know Fickell spoke, talked about it after the game. He was a little bit, he loved that ball was down at the 2. I think he goes, we put 2 balls in the end zone. And I think that may have been what he was focused on, but that's exactly what happens when you beat a team 42-7, you're looking to nitpick stuff. And that's what we're going to do here in a second. But when I just going back to the defensive aspect of this, the secondary, there were guys open, but I also thought, like, they came up and made important tackles, especially early in the game. I'm thinking I think it was the second drive of the game. They threw that little toss to the outside, the throw, and Nazir Forkreen came up and just drilled his guy, stopped him short, and he got the punt. That might have been the first drive. Can't remember exactly off the top of my head here, but they made the plays that they needed to. You mentioned Hunter Wohler coming up with the tip that Preston Zachman got. Preston Zachman, career high 10 tackles, a tackle and a half for loss, and the interception. And I know there were so many people before the season that were like, yeah, I know he's listed as a starter, but that's going to be somebody else. That's going to be he has established himself along with Hunter Wohler as the 2 guys back there. There hasn't been barely any rotation back there. Now we got to see some 6 DB 6 DBs on the field yesterday, where they were kind of playing Max Lofi in a little bit of a safety / slot role along with Austin Brown and all that good stuff. But those 2 guys, Wohler and Zachman, have proven that they are the 2 guys that deserve the most playing time back there.
I think Zachman got lost in the shuffle in spring ball because he was coming back from an injury, and so he didn't participate. You kind of forget about a guy and don't know what he's going to provide, because you had Max Lofi starting to stand out in the slot, and therefore we thought, okay, so then Austin Brown's going to be at safety. He's kind of hard to keep off the field. They started him in a nickel during the bowl game. You still have Hunter Wohler. Kamoe Latu has been in and out with injuries, but you figure he's going to be a factor. Latu was out for this game, and so obviously that gives more opportunity, but Zachman has been so consistent. He's got multiple interceptions this season. And you're right. I feel like the defensive backs were able to keep pretty much everything in front of them. I think Ricardo Hallman would have loved to have a play back on that first series where the ball was underthrown and he probably should have intercepted it. Maybe since he had a great game against Rutgers a year ago, it comes back around, but they've been really good. And I'm really interested to see what will happen as they build confidence to some of these games later in the season where they're going to be consistently tested against really good athletes. Can they rise to the challenge? But right now, these 2 games have been, it's hard to find a lot of criticism when you outscore teams the way they have the last 2 weeks.
One more thing before we get to what went wrong. In 3 games in Piscataway, Wisconsin's outscored Rutgers 131-10.
Is that good?
That is just ridiculous domination. And it's been through 3 different eras. I don't want to say eras. 3 different, certainly 3 different head coaches. Gary Anderson was the head coach when they went there and won 37-0. Paul Chryst was the head coach when they went down there and won 52-3. And now Luke Fickell goes and wins 42-7. And this was, I think, in my opinion, probably the best Rutgers team that they had faced in Piscataway, but it just has not mattered down there. They have owned the games. They've owned the games in Wisconsin too, but they've absolutely obliterated Rutgers on the road all 3 times that they've played. They are in the birthplace of college football. That's everywhere out there, everywhere. All right, let's get to what went wrong. A lot went wrong for Rutgers. Not a ton went wrong for Wisconsin. But I think I know people aren't going to. I mean, we spent some time we've spent time on this throughout the season, and I still find it just insane that it continues to come up, both positively and negatively. Why can't people catch punts? Why is it the hardest thing in the world to catch a punt? Both Atticus Purcher's punts and for Wisconsin's punt returners, because they have now put a ball on the ground 4 times in 6 games, or in 4 of 6 games, I should say, including Hunter Wohler, the new punt returner, doing it yesterday. So now 3 different guys have done it. I don't get it. It's tough. It's tough for me to understand how you just don't have anybody on the team that just, because that's all that matters. Just go back and catch the ball.
It's an epidemic, apparently. I don't have a good answer for this. It's not easy. The ball's moving. It's windy, whatever. That's your job. That's your responsibility. And it's a tougher spot for a guy like Hunter where that hasn't been his role at all. But we've seen this in years past where, okay, somebody with good hands, somebody who's reliable, somebody we can trust. All you have to do is catch the ball. And obviously muffed one and was able to recover it. So I don't exactly know what the formula is moving forward. Now, obviously they didn't have Tyrell Henry for this game, but he's put one on the turf. Vinnie Anthony's put one on there. And so they're just going to have to figure out somebody who can still have the ball in his hands at the end of the play. But when you win 42-7, you're looking for things that didn't go right. And this is one of them, but at least the Badgers were able to avoid a turnover.
They were able to do that. One other thing on special teams, it appeared that the wind was pretty significant there yesterday. I don't know if it was. I couldn't listen to the broadcast. I wasn't in a position to listen to it, so I was just watching. But it looked like Vakos's field goal just went. He sent it this way and it went that way, and so he missed from, what was that, 30 something, 37,
35 wide right, I think.
Yeah, so that was a negative. Will Pauling get knocked out of a game for a second straight week is a negative, and I don't know exactly how serious that one is. Like it's different when you get like a leg injury, right? Like we saw what happened. He's a tough guy. He'll be back. It's a little bit different when maybe something else happens that's above the shoulders where you don't really have control of. You can't fight through that type of thing.
Yeah, and obviously that's a play that it's no one's fault, certainly not his fault, but that is not a good thing for Will and for this offense and for this team because of what he's meant. And we'll have to see whether he'll be available this week. I'm sure when we talk to Luke on Monday, he won't necessarily have an answer because especially early in the week, I think they like to wait and evaluate. At the very least, though, Wisconsin's been able to show that they've got somebody like a Tretch Kakahuna and some other playmakers, but you want your best players available. And right now, Wisconsin has not had that. And I think that almost makes what they've done here even more impressive because when we went into the season, you would have said, well, who are your 2 best pass catchers and the guys that you think they're going to rely on the most? It'd be Will Pauling and Bryson Green, and they haven't had them much in the last 2 games.
And I think that they've been able to continue on because of other guys really come to the forefront. Vinnie Anthony, CJ Williams, Tretch Kakahuna stepping up and being playmakers and being the playmakers that I think Tretch for sure, and then Vinnie Anthony just because of his speed, and then CJ Williams kind of got lost because of all the other guys. But he, as we talked about earlier, 5 catches, 5 first downs the last 2 weeks. So impressive. Is there anything else that stood out for you and what went wrong on Saturday? I don't want. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, not a ton. Again, we're going to nitpick. Obviously, Braden throws an interception. He threw a pass that he shouldn't have thrown. Okay, well, you live to play another down, and or at least on the next series, and you end up with a touchdown. So it's hard to put too much on that one play, given what happened afterward. But beyond that, I don't really think there's a ton you can say went wrong when you win a game the way that Wisconsin did. Because this, and I should have said this earlier, this to me was the most impressive performance of the Luke Fickell era to date. I realized that there weren't necessarily a ton of other options. Obviously, they hammered a bad Purdue team that somehow came back from a ridiculous deficit against Illinois, only to lose with the worst 2-point conversion call ever. But this, given where Rutgers was just, to me, the most impressive game we've seen in the last year and a half.
I felt like the execution of that 2-point try was worse than maybe the call was, because it felt like maybe a guy was open. Irrelevant. We don't need to talk about it. It was a hell of a game. There were a lot of fun football games this weekend. Tennessee and obviously Tennessee and Florida, but Going down the list, the one in Eugene was just a remarkable back and forth. And Will Howard, what are you doing? What are you doing? I had to throw out the
Wayne Cook.
Yes,
I knew it.
I had to throw it out there. So he runs up. There's no time. I mean, they do have a timeout left, but he doesn't get on the ground, and it reminded me immediately of Wayne Cook in the 1994 Rose Bowl, where he runs late, no reason to run. I mean, he didn't have any timeouts left. He tries to get his guys back up, but at the end of it, Brian Anthony, the play-by-play guy for Wisconsin in that game, was like, "Thank you, Wayne Cook," and he did a lot better than that. And it reminded me of that, and so I tweeted out, "Thank you, Will Howard." And you have to be a certain age and a certain ridiculous person to understand the reference there. It's a deep cut, but I think a few people got it, and I'm glad you did. But that you got it because you did a story. You did that whole
yes. I managed to talk to Wayne Cook for the big oral history on Barry Alvarez's turnaround. I think it was like 25 years later. This ran and must have been 2015, but like that's 30 years later, 31 years later, and he's still having to talk about it. Those moments can haunt you for a long time if you're not careful.
I can still see it in my head from my seat at the Rose Bowl. I can still see it because it was just like, what are you doing? I thought he was going to JJ Stokes. JJ Stokes was unstoppable in that game. Unstoppable. Should not have thrown up to JJ Stokes. I probably would have scored. But either way, yes, in terms of what went wrong, I felt like the end of the first half was disjointed a little bit again. I don't know that it didn't feel like that they had an exact plan on what exactly they wanted to do, but I'm not going to get into that because I don't have all the facts and figures, because when you win 42-7, you don't focus on that type of stuff. But all right, let's get to some listener questions, and we'll start with the one I kind of talked about the other day, or excuse me, at the top of the show, was should Cade Yacamelli be running back 2? He's shown nothing but explosives. One fumble has been his only negative play, always creates something. And we also have some other stuff. I got one more in here. I don't understand this. Yacamelli has been the most explosive back all year, and he can't sniff a touch right now. And I will tell you that his mom retweeted that. So,
yeah, this is an interesting question. And while not necessarily fair, I almost think you're in a spot where if you're playing really well, you don't want to do something to change it. But there's no denying what Yacamelli has been able to do when he's been on the field. I think it comes down to, if you're evaluating whose ceiling is higher long term, I certainly think they believe that it's Darian Dupree. Now, he has not necessarily had a high yards per carry average, but he's more versatile. He's obviously got an ability to catch some passes out of the backfield. We've seen that a little bit. Maybe this is something they've got to continue to evaluate. I don't know what that would be like for a true freshman, where you finally get your role, you know what it's going to be, it's defined, and then after a couple of games, you pull the plug and you change it. Obviously, these coaches are in the business of winning games and putting the players on the field in the best position to do that. I think either one of those guys can do it, but if you're going to pare down your rotation, you can't play both. I don't think you can have a situation where it's okay, Tawee Walker is going to get 20 carries and then it's going to be 9 and 9 for the other two. Obviously, if they wanted to do that, they would be doing that. And that doesn't seem like that's what they want the plan to be, which is why Luke said a couple weeks ago he wanted to pare down the rotation. The downside to that is somebody's going to be left out. So I kind of feel like that's where they're at, but it is hard to deny what he's done when he gets in there. He breaks off these big runs. Now, some of it might also have to do with the role that he's in at the time in which he's in. I'd like to see maybe what it would look like on the third series when it's the first quarter, but this is what we have to go on.
This was part of this question. This was not part of the same question, but it hits on the same thing. How does it seem that the line opened up holes for Walker and Yacamelli to run through, but nothing for the freshman? How much is it the timing of the veteran running backs versus O-line creating holes?
This is a hard one to parse out for me personally, because I'm just going to be honest, I don't know the answer. Some of it may have to do with good fortune, and some of it may have to do with understanding your blocking and timing and reads. I mean, Dupree is a different type of back. I think he's fast, but what is he like when he sees a hole and hits it? And what kind of patience does he have relative to a Walker or a Yacamelli? I think there's something to be said for those two things. And he also hasn't had a ton of opportunities in games now. And I think there's just no way to duplicate that no matter how many practice reps you get.
It wasn't just the one tweet that she retweeted. Her entire timeline is, why can't Yacamelli get on the field more? All right. So John asks, the use of tempo was noticeable and seems to be a key to offensive success. Why weren't they using it earlier in the season? Does Locke just have a better command of the playbook?
The tempo thing is something that I think we were talking about from the moment this flipped over from being Tyler Van Dyke's team to Braedyn Locke's team, because it's what he said immediately after the game against Alabama. And it's something that Luke has talked about, that if they wanted to cater to the strengths of whoever their quarterback is going to be. And while the physical gifts, I think, were more prevalent in Van Dyke, and we saw that consistently in practice with the arm strength, the ability to pick up chunks of yards as a runner, Locke's knowledge allows them to play at a faster tempo, it felt like, and it's something that he believed was going to allow them to be successful. So, I mean, that's the best that we have to go on, is they felt all along like that was an area that where he could help the offense, and we're seeing that.
Brendan asks, do you think this team has found an identity? And if so, what is it?
It certainly felt like this was the closest thing to the identity that Luke has wanted. And I know we've talked a lot about, well, okay, you say you want to be this one thing, but then you brought an offensive coordinator in here who did things in a little bit different way. And are you handcuffing him? Are you going to let him open up the playbook? And it felt like the Rutgers game was kind of that perfect blend of both. So open up the playbook, throw the ball around, do the things that Wisconsin traditionally has not been able to do. And the things, that's why you brought Phil Longo here. Modernize the offense, open it up. But it has all been predicated on what Luke wants, which is this physical identity. How many times has he said all season that he wants to put more on the offensive line, that he wants to lean on them? And it was kind of hard to really understand how that would materialize on the field. It was like, well, you're saying this every week, but I'm watching what's happening in the games, and it's just, it's not happening. So when am I going to see enough to make me believe in this team? And this was one of those games, because not only did they open it up, but they were so physical on the ground. And maybe it's the two plays where they went to the eye that kind of stands out in your mind, but obviously they had a hell of a lot of other running plays out of the shotgun where they had tremendous success. And so I think that's the identity, is taking what Wisconsin did previously and blending it with what is new. And so that's what they want the identity to be. It's still about the toughness and the discipline, because that's how Wisconsin's going to win games, but elevating it to another level that Wisconsin didn't have in the past. That's how I see it.
Wanted to go back to the Yacamelli thing real quickly, because someone interjected themselves into the conversation with saying, why isn't he getting more carries, right? And this person guessed, it's because Yacamelli is the only back that hasn't been recruited by our coach right now. The coach doesn't want him there, and he wants to show people that his players get the job done. How do you think there's any little small, any validity to that?
I don't think that a coach would withhold playing time from someone because he wasn't his guy, but I also think there is something to be said for recruiting someone who's as highly regarded as a Darian Dupree or a Dylan Jones and wanting to give them opportunities. I also think, look, we haven't been at a practice since the second week in August. And so we're speculating because we don't know what's happening in practice. And Darian must be doing something in these last 2 months to show that he's worthy of being the number 2. But you also you're trying to win now, and you're trying to establish what the future could be. And it really feels like Darian is the future. And so again, it sucks for Cade, and somebody is going to be left out. And right now it's him. I don't know how much you can say he's not their guy. If that's the case, look at all these other positions. If you're the best guy, and it's like overwhelmingly so, then I think you're going to play. How many guys on defense? We were talking about Hunter Wohler and Preston Zachman. Those are the old guard. Same with Ricardo Hallman. Same with Jake Chaney. Same with Jack Nelson. The guys that represented Wisconsin at Big Ten Media Day, all 3 guys were from the previous regime. So I certainly can understand that point to a degree, but I don't think they're necessarily basing their complete decision off that. They're in the business of trying to win.
Vinnie Anthony, another guy, a Paul Chris recruit. Trash Kakuna, technically, I guess, a Paul Chris recruit. Jackson, fullback Jackson Aker, Paul Chris recruit. You can go on down the line. Riley Nowakowski. There are a number of guys that play a lot of football, and it's not simply because, they're playing because they're good. They're playing because the coaches believe that they're better than the other people. I think the the thing with Yacamelli is just because you see the big runs, you see the explosiveness, and we haven't seen that yet from Darian. And I to be honest with you, Jesse, I think it's a fair question to ask. I do, like, whether he should be the 2 or Darian, just based on the production at this point. But I also understand the future of it too, like trying to be in the moment, and also understand that maybe he is the guy of the future, but you're also trying to win now. I think it's very difficult balance, I think, to have if you're Luke Fickell and Devin Spalding and Phil Longo, and just trying to figure out exactly what gives you the best chance now, but also wanting to give guys an opportunity to show what they can do.
I also think this, to me, still can be a fluid situation. Nothing's set in stone. So let's say Darian is averaging 3.5 yards per carry, and I don't know how many attempts Cade's going to get in a given game. And it's probably going to be fewer if it's not a blowout. But let's just say they do give him a handful and he continues to make these plays. Maybe they do make a switch, because I don't think it's as big of a deal to make a switch at number 2, who's going to get 7 carries or something like that, as opposed to number 1, who's going to get 24 carries like Tawee Walker did against Rutgers. And I think that's going to continue. I don't know that he's going to get 18 carries in the first half every week like he did against Rutgers, but like I said this the week before, it felt like he's at least an 18 to 20 carry a game type of guy. So I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could make a change with the backup spot. But I also think they want to give Darian a larger sample size to show what he can do, because these reps are so invaluable.
Yeah, I agree. All right, big picture question here now. John wants to know, will this team ever lose again? But I'll go with this instead. Jake says, with the play the past 2 weeks, is it reasonable to think this team can finish 9-3?
I'm not ready to go there yet. I said before, even though the 2 games were at home, Penn State and Oregon, those those are tough games, and you still got to go on the road and beat Iowa and beat Nebraska. So again, I said 7-5 at the start of the season. I still think that'd be a good season if they somehow go 8-4 and go. Obviously, they went 4-2 in the first half, 4-2 in the second. I think that's pretty darn good given what the schedule provides. So you're asking if they're going to go 5-1 over the next 6. I have a hard time seeing that, though I will say that what we've seen the last 2 weeks, and in particular against Rutgers, gives me a level of optimism that I have not felt at any point this season.
So you're saying that the game against Rutgers, pulling this all the way back to the start of the show, game against Rutgers has changed your mind and what they're capable of?
I still think they're going to go 7-5. I just feel better about that 7-5 pick than I did before. So
if the Badgers win out, this is another question. Jimmy wants to know, if they win out, but do not get into the Big Ten championship, do they make the college football playoff?
I'm going to say yes.
I think definitely yes, because they'll have wins over Penn State and Oregon.
Yep.
To go along with, having won at that point, it would be what, 8 straight? No.
Yeah.
No, 8 straight with wins over 2 top 10 teams, plus Nebraska, plus at Iowa. I mean, both those games on the road, they would definitely be in it. I don't think there's any doubt.
If you want to get crazy, any Big Ten team moving forward, given where we are in college football, is going to be in the college football playoff if they go 10-2. It doesn't matter how you get to 10-2, though. If you
especially 8-1 in conference play.
Yeah. Now, obviously, Alabama's had some troubles, but has 1 loss and is still a top 10 team. USC's now had 3 losses and is out of the playoff hunt. But yeah, you would have beaten Penn State, which has a bye this coming week, if I'm not mistaken, and so therefore will be undefeated when it comes to Madison. In the top, will probably be 3rd in the country, right? I mean, there's Texas, there's Oregon, there's Ohio State lost. So
Oregon moved up to number 2.
Yeah,
Texas is still 1. Right. I would assume that Penn State's at 3. I haven't seen the updated poll yet.
And then you'd have Oregon. So yes, obviously it's a hypothetical that doesn't feel real, but Yeah, they would be in my mind.
Let's see where everybody is here. Yeah, Oregon is 2, Penn State is 3, Ohio State only dropped to 4, so they dropped from
That's
2
fair
to
to
4.
me.
I
That's
think
fair
so
to me.
too.
You
Yeah.
went on the road in that environment against an unbeaten number 2 team and lost by a point. Yeah, they're worthy of still being there.
Illinois moved up too somehow. Indiana all the way up to number 16.
6-0, man. There's only 3 6-0 teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I thought by last night there was only going to be 2 unbeaten teams left in conference play, and then obviously Penn State came back and beat USC, and it kind of ruined that. But yeah, that is they haven't. We'll see what happens. Indiana's got some games to play here the rest of the way, right? They get Nebraska this week. They have to go. They play Michigan, Ohio State. They actually have a really. I'm not going to call it an easy schedule, but they have a very favorable schedule here this first year of the expanded Big Ten. They get Ohio State and they get Michigan, but that's it in terms of like big time teams. They don't play Iowa. They don't play USC. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Wisconsin. Not that Wisconsin's a big time team, but they don't play Illinois. Like they don't play any of the other good teams in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State later on in the year. And we'll see where Michigan is at that point too. But, it's fun to be talking about this. I'll say that it's much more fun to talk about a team that is good and people are excited about than it is the other way around, even though the interaction probably is a little bit more when things are not going well, but that's fine. All right. Wisconsin will be at Northwestern coming up on Saturday. What's the name of that field called? Any idea?
I cannot remember off the top of my head. Field on the Lake. Will that work?
Apparently it's supposed to be pretty windy down there on Saturday. It's right off the lake, as you said, and we'll see. Wisconsin and Northwestern in Evanston has not always been kind to Wisconsin, but maybe based on what they've done the last 2 weeks, maybe they're rolling and it just won't matter. But we'll talk about that throughout the week. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.